Hello and welcome to the Scatterable channel, and today we're going to be ranking every single brand new graphics card you can buy in 2025 in a tier list. So there are a lot of different graphics cards out there from AMD, Nvidia, and Intel, and you may just want to know which graphics cards are the good ones I should get and which graphics cards are the bad ones I should absolutely stay away from, either for my custom gaming PC or for a certain pre-built gaming PC that I'm looking at. Well, the good news for you is that I've spent the last few hours compiling up this super handy tier list, ranking all of the graphics cards released so far in 2025 from S tier all the way down to below F tier, because there are some really bad graphics cards that were released this year that I don't want you to get. So again, the point of this video is to make sure you make the right graphics card buying decision and not the wrong one. So with all that said, I want to mention that this is a tier list for all brand new graphics cards that have released from late 2024 into 2025. So if you don't see your graphics card on this tier list, that's probably because it's a last generation graphics card or something that's older that is no longer being sold brand new, which would be considered used, which if you want to know how well that would stack up in 2025, do check out my used GPU tier list video where I cover all last generation and older graphics cards and compare them and see how they stack up in 2025. So if your GPU is missing in this video, it's probably going to be in that one, so give that one a watch. Otherwise, we're going to get straight into the tier list because there are no sponsors in this video, other than my super cool new website, gpus.gg, which can help you find the right graphics card for your system based off your needs and specifications. So if you're familiar with pcbuilds.gg, then gpus.gg is pretty similar. You can put in a certain filter for what kind of VRAM you want in your graphics card, whether you want something that's more ray tracing focused or something that's more content creation focused. You can find all of that with a price slider on gpus.gg. And I'm going to be referencing it quite a bit throughout this tier list video. It's going to be a pretty useful resource for pricing because not only does it cover the United States, but it also covers a lot of Europe and the UK. So that can be found in the description down below, along with all of the best graphics cards from this tier list, obviously not the bad ones, and I'll stop talking. Let's get straight into the tier list. Starting with drivers, because this is important, especially in 2025. You want to know how well the drivers are for a certain graphics card that you're looking into. And again, we're covering those from Nvidia, AMD, and Intel. So let's actually start with AMD. There's a lot of misconceptions online on the state of AMD graphics card drivers because quite a few people online will still repeat the fact that AMD drivers are bad. They're unstable, they're unusable for gaming, and a lot of the people who state that, in my opinion, are still living in the past. Because an argument very much could have been said for the state of AMD graphics card drivers before 2020 because their game driver development team, it just simply was not as big as their competitor at the time, that being Nvidia. And also AMD was still kind of finding their footing when it came to their graphics cards at the time, and this was especially prevalent for their first release of their RDNA 1 GPUs back in 2019 with the RX 5700 and RX 5700 XT. Those, because they were a brand new architecture and AMD was still figuring it out, had a lot of issues at launch. And I can personally vouch as well. My RX 5700 review unit was not the greatest experience. That said, ever since then, from RDNA 2 onwards, so RX 6000 and onwards, because we're now in RX 9000, their GPU drivers have been not only very stable, but as of 2025, arguably slightly better than Nvidia. Yes, in 2025, AMD might have better game drivers than Nvidia, and don't take it from me, take it from Tech Jesus himself. As a matter of fact, Gamers Nexus did a complete deep dive on the current state of Nvidia drivers for gaming and found quite a bit of issues, most likely because a lot of Nvidia's internal resources for their traditional game-ready driver development team may have been split a little bit to focus more on artificial intelligence. Look at a bunch of other tech content creators and their experiences with the latest Nvidia drivers. Even some game developers have recommended rolling back certain drivers on Nvidia GPUs here and there to improve performance, but I will tell you in 2025, I still think Nvidia drivers are good, so I will put them in S tier. However, I think AMD is going to be slightly better. They've had a clean track record so far this year. Therefore, I kind of throw them in S tier above Nvidia. And once again, to the credit of all those people who still think AMD drivers are bad and blah 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 and all this negative nomenclature, they were right 10 years ago, which is why I'm gonna put pre-2020 AMD Radeon drivers in B tier. Now, what are some genuinely bad graphics card drivers? This has to deal with it actually. Intel Arc, when it first launched in 2022, had the horrific drivers a lot of people said AMD drivers were bad for. But actually, this was a real deal. Like, Intel Arc graphics cards at launch in 2022 had horrifically bad optimization and a lot of on-screen glitches and instability. So bad, I actually gotta go ahead and add a row below D tier because it really was that bad. Launch day drivers for the Intel Arc A770, A750 were not that good, therefore F tier. However, since then, because Intel have released a new generation of Intel Arc graphics cards called Battlemage in the B580 and the B570 have improved massively. At launch, the B580 and B570 actually did pretty well in terms of overall game support and stability, but there's only one issue that kind of holds back those Battlemage GPUs, and that is CPU overhead. You could find some situations where you would have a Intel Arc B580 on a budget CPU like a Ryzen 5 5600 or an older i5 12400 get less performance than what you paid for versus the top of the line 9800 X3D or 14900K that an Intel Arc B580 would be benchmarked on, because at least those super fast GPUs could fully utilize the strength of a slower graphics card. But on a more mainstream CPU that's more budget friendly, it actually in some cases wouldn't be able to fully tap into the full potential of a B580 or a B570. Again, not in all games, but in a few. Which means if you wanted to make the most of an Intel Arc B580 or B570, you needed to spend more on your CPU, which wouldn't make a lot of sense in a budget gaming PC with an Intel Arc GPU. Now, as far as I can tell, this is a little bit of an architecture issue, so this necessarily can't be fixed with a software update in the drivers, but I will say this isn't something that plagues all PC games that you play on those Intel Arc graphics cards. And again, if you have a powerful enough CPU like a Ryzen 5 7500F or Intel Core i5 13600K, 12600K, or Core Ultra 235 or better, you won't have to worry about this at all. But if you have a super budget PC, something that's really cheap with a really old CPU, you probably will run into issues with a Battlemage GPU. So because of that driver overhead issue, I'm gonna put current Intel Arc graphics card drivers in C tier, but if you have a fast enough CPU, I might actually put these in B tier. But because of that overhead issue, that is pretty much gonna be there, I think, for the rest of the Battlemage lifespan. I think it's gonna be C tier. So there you have it, those are drivers, and now let's get on to the graphics cards. So let's kick things off with the RTX 5050. Ugh. Yeah, so if you didn't notice, we're going from cheapest to the most expensive. That's how we're gonna go through the rest of this tier list. But what a graphics card to start off with. So there is an @risk next to the title of the GPU, and that's because it's not out yet. But we do know the specifications of the graphics card, and we kind of know how fast it's gonna be, because the RTX 5050 is going to contain 33% less CUDA cores than the RTX 5060. Yet, here in the United States at least, there's going to be a $50 difference in price. And I don't know about you, but okay, let me show you a really cool chart here. So this right here is a really cool graph from Hardware Unbox that shows you the relative percent of how much CUDA cores is contained inside of an Nvidia graphics card versus its flagship. So like an RTX 5090, RTX 4090, or even like a GTX Titan. And what you'll notice is that over the years, Nvidia have been slowly giving you less and less in the mid-range and low end of graphics cards as far as the CUDA core count. So for example, the RTX 4060 last year contained 19% of the total CUDA cores you would have gotten in an RTX 4090, which may seem fine on paper, but if you go a few generations back, you'll find that actually has the same percentage ratio of a GTX 1050 versus the GTX Titan or the 1080 Ti, one of those two. So you're effectively getting a 50 series class GPU, but with the 60 series class name. And that's a problem. You're basically getting less while paying more. And this is again in terms of hardware. We're not talking about features and DLSS quite yet. But what's super concerning about the 5050 is that we're gonna see a consumer graphics card for the first time with the RTX label go below 18% CUDA core utilization versus the RTX 5090. It's going to be one of the most cut down GPUs we will ever witness that isn't something like a GT 1030 or a GTX 1630. Both of those GPUs, by the way, were absolutely terrible. So what? 33% less CUDA cores than a 5060 means the 5050 might have 12% of the CUDA cores of a 5090? That's And you want to know what's funny? What's the funniest thing about this? Let me roll you back again. The RTX 3050 6GB, when it released, was also a bad graphics card, but the one redeeming value of it was that it was able to be put inside a gaming PC without the need of a PCIe power connector. So it could just be powered on by the motherboard. And why this is awesome is because in certain gaming PCs, like an old pre-built from Dell, you could just slap in a 3050 and turn like a $100 Dell Optiplex into a gaming PC without needing to upgrade the power supply, which made it in some ways a really convenient graphics card for older systems and bringing them back to life and repurposing them as gaming PCs, because the TDP of the 3050 6GB is 75 watts. Hold up, let me cook. Again, I'm not joking here. TDP of the 3050 6GB, 70 watts. And how about the 4060, for example? That didn't have the same thing. It didn't have the ability to just be powered on by the PCI Express slot on your motherboard. It needed a PCIe power cable. This has a TDP of 115 watts. And if you're curious, the 5060 has a TDP of about 145 watts. You want to guess what the TDP of the RTX 5050 is? Let's make a bet. Do we think it's gonna be below 100 watts or above 100 watts? Considering that the 3050 6GB was below 100 watts and actually made sense. How about 130? So what this means is that it's gonna need a PCIe power connector. So it can't be, the one thing it could have been redeemed on, it makes no sense. And here's the thing, I know where this tier list is gonna end up. I was not joking. We need to go below F tier in this video. Okay, again, we gotta wait for reviews, but I think Nvidia aren't gonna send out samples for the RTX 5050 like what they did for the 5060, because it's gonna be really bad. Avoid at all costs. There is no point in getting it. Do not get fooled. Do not get the RTX 5050. It is not going to be a worthwhile graphics card for $250. What else is $250? We're gonna cover it soon, but next, the Intel Arc B750. This guy right here. This is fine, it's all right. Just the problem with the Intel Arc B series right now is they were launched back in December of 2024 with very aggressive MSRP. The B570, for instance, I think had an MSRP of $219 US, which for the time was incredibly competitive. But fast forward, at least here in the United States, we have to deal with tariffs on electronic goods coming from Taiwan and China, which have raised the price of these to where if we were to check out GPUs.gg, in the United States, the B750 can be had for about $260, which is about $40 above MSRP, but usually it's about $50 above MSRP at $280. And the issue with that is, again, if you look to the left of this, you have the 5060, you have the 9060 XT 8GB, and although those graphics cards come with less memory, they're still straight up faster. The B570 more or less is meant to be an upsell to get the B580 for more. So it isn't that hot of a graphics card, but once again, I will say, if you are a video editor and you want a budget video editing graphics card, one of the redeeming factors of these Intel Arc GPUs is that they come with the Intel Quick Sync codec, which is really nice for editing compressed H.265 4K 10-bit 422 footage on the fly in DaVinci and Premiere Pro. But again, this is a gaming tier list, so keep that in mind. The B570 is going in D tier. It's, yep, this one's a lot better. This one is a lot better. Here we got the Intel Arc B580. So right now, in terms of current US pricing, the B580 is $300 being on, which is still $50 above MSRP. However, unlike the B570, when it launched at $250 back in December, it was groundbreaking. It was a godsend for budget PC gamers. This thing destroyed the RTX 4060, Radeon RX 7600, and it got close to the RX 6700 XT in terms of performance. And even right now in 2025, when the Intel graphics card driver team nails their optimization for this graphics card, they nail it really freaking good. I think it's in Doom the Dark Ages. The B580 is almost at the performance level of an RX 6800, which is seriously impressive for this caliber of a graphics card. So I will say, on the topic of Intel drivers, although there is that CPU overhead issue, if you have a fast enough CPU and you're playing on the right game, this GPU is gonna offer you some insanely good performance per dollar. There are certain games that don't run the best on the B580, like Starfield. So I will say it's mostly consistent as far as a graphics card goes, but there are a few games that are really overperforming on this graphics card and a few games that are underperforming. And I think the main issue I have right now with the B580 is its current price. Although its MSRP is $250, it's been stuck at $300 for like the past 3 months here in the United States. But if I were to go ahead and check abroad here for a moment, for instance, let's go over to Germany. I want to see what the prices are for the B580. It's below 300 euros. And actually, if you look at the B570, 260 euros, oh, that's fine. But look here in the Netherlands, the B580 is below 300 euros at 288, and it's below the 9060 XT 8GB. And okay, the 5060 hasn't updated yet, but I would assume in Europe, the B580 is actually running for a better price than here in the United States. It's closer to MSRP there than it is here. So I gotta put its value somewhere in the middle, because while it released in 2024 with raving reviews, in 2025, there are some graphics cards around it that are faster in quite a few games. So I'm gonna put this in C tier. You'll see why as I continue ranking graphics cards in the video. But next up, we've got the RTX. Oh my goodness, I have not sorted these out. Give me a moment. Okay, we're back on track. Let's start with the RX 9060 XT 8GB. So already, this graphics card raises some red flags, and that is because it has 8GB of VRAM, and at a selling point of $300 US, that is way too high of an asking price for a graphics card with only 8GB of VRAM. Once again, we just covered the Intel Arc B580 and B570, both of which come with 12 and 10 GB of VRAM, and they technically cost less than this 9060 XT 8GB graphics card. The only redeeming factor for this GPU is that it does come with a PCI Express S16 5.0 port on the GPU, which is handy if you're gonna run this on an older PC. It actually increases the bandwidth a little bit for older based systems that use a PCIe Gen 4.0 or possibly even 3.0 connector. But a lot of those benefits are nullified by the fact that this once again has 8GB of VRAM. So once you completely saturate your VRAM, you're again gonna be at a dead end with this graphics card. The only games that make sense with this graphics card are those that are esports games, super easy to run, like Fortnite, Valorant, Marvel Rivals, those kinds of games that basically your grandma's PC can already run. Because anything more graphically intense than that, especially at 1440p, is going to run into memory issues as you use the GPU in a single setting, because that VRAM is just going to get saturated, and then it's eventually going to run out. And it just really severely limits the capabilities of this GPU. So although technically it is faster than the B580 at 1080p, at 1440p in sustained gaming in certain games, I wouldn't be surprised if the B580, despite being a slower graphics card, manages to edge out this GPU simply because it has more VRAM to work with than this. So for that reason, I gotta throw it in F tier. At $300, it's a very, very poor value. Its use case is very small. It really needed more VRAM. That's the only issue with this graphics card. like the RTX 5060, which has still seen basically the same memory specifications as the old 4060. Now, if you're wondering, between the RTX 5060 and the 9060 XT 8GB, they're actually fairly similar, although I would give the slight performance edge to the 9060 XT 8GB because it has that PCI Express X16 5.0 slot on the GPU versus this only having a PCI Express X8 5.0 slot on the GPU. Which means when you run out of memory on the 5060, it's gonna be worse than what's gonna happen on the 9060 XT. But don't get it twisted. Both of these have 8GB of VRAM. Both of them are not gonna be suitable for 1440p gaming, and they're mostly gonna be limited to 1080p gaming. Now that said, an argument could be said that the 5060 actually might be a more practical purchase because more games support Nvidia Reflex, and a lot of those Nvidia Reflex games are really easy to run esports games that you'd already want some low frame times on. And also a game like Fortnite only supports DLSS. And even with all those things considered, the box right here is actually for a 5060 low profile because this is the only configuration I recommend getting the 5060 in, period. Because name me another low profile graphics card that is faster than the 5060. So if you're someone who's building a very small form factor ITX PC, this is the fastest small form factor GPU you can buy right now. Not even the 9060 8GB features that. So with that in mind, I actually gotta give it the slight edge versus the 9060 XT 8GB because it does have a few more use case scenarios to it that make it a slightly better buy, but that doesn't take away from the fact that it has 8GB of VRAM for a graphics card that costs $300 in 2025. It's going to become e-waste in a few years. It's not good unless you have a small form factor PC, and that's it. I rest my case. But this next one though. We have the RX 9060 XT 16GB, and it is a night and day difference between this GPU and the 9060 XT 8GB. Let me explain. Actually, it's gonna be really easy to explain. This has 16 gigabytes of memory, and surprisingly, to some degree, I thought this would have been a downside of the 9060 XT 16GB because it does have a 128-bit memory bus, the same as the 9060 XT 8GB, which I thought would have been a problem on this graphics card. But according to benchmarks, with that RDNA 4 architecture, it's got enough memory bandwidth actually at its disposal, which is a good thing to see because at 1440p, it does a really good job. It's actually in line or at times slightly faster than the previous RX 7700 XT. And actually, with this versus the RTX 5060 Ti 16GB, it's not that much slower. Yet it retails, let's check, for about $80 less right now. And for an $80 difference, I would clearly pick up the 9060 XT 16GB. And I think the last thing I do want to mention is that RX 9000 GPUs made a serious step up when it came to their ray tracing performance. It's actually really staggering, and you'll see this later on in the tier list. But the 9060 XT, although it's in line with the 7700 XT in terms of regular performance, when it comes to ray tracing, the 9060 XT completely brushes past the 7700 XT. And actually, I don't know how close it gets to a 7800 XT in terms of ray tracing performance, but that's really impressive for a graphics card that right now is only about $20 above MSRP, in the United States at least. So if the B580 is an entry-level 1440p gaming GPU, I think the 9060 XT 16GB is a mainstream 1440p gaming GPU at the low end. As in, this is the least I would spend to have a fairly complete 1440p gaming experience. And at $350 for its MSRP, that's actually pretty good. This GPU can cook. I'm actually kind of happy to recommend it. But you know what? B tier. Yeah, I mean, if it was faster, this GPU would be like out of stock 24/7, like what you'll see later on in the tier list for a certain other RX 9000 GPU. So while this GPU is very nice, it wasn't earth-shattering. But B tier, by all means, in this current day and age in 2025, I think is still very respectable. What isn't respectable though, is the RTX 5060 Ti 8GB. Oh, Man, oh man, oh man. Let's check how much this GPU costs. We'll start out with that. The 5060 Ti 8GB, which has 8GB of VRAM, by the way. Same as the 5060, same as the 9060 XT 8GB. $380. Oh my God. And the worst part is this GPU, kind of like the 9060 XT, I kind of forgot to mention this. It's a bit of a smokescreen graphics card because while the 5060 Ti not only comes in 8GB, it also comes in 16GB. And as I just showed with the 9060 XT, you could probably assume the 16GB is considerably better in terms of performance just by having more VRAM. And the 8GB, as you can probably tell, runs out of memory in quite a few games at 1440p. Actually, it can get kind of bad. Like, it gets beat out by the B580 kind of bad. Guys, I mean, I could get into some more logical reasons why I wouldn't recommend the 5060 Ti 8GB, but really, I just gotta laugh every time I see an 8GB graphics card in this tier list because in 2025, you should not be buying a graphics card with 8GB of VRAM. Just what makes the 5060 Ti 8GB really egregious is its price, $380. Who in their right mind would pick up that graphics card over a 9060 XT 16GB? It makes zero sense. VRAM plays a very important role right now in gaming PCs because of current game optimizations, and this coming in with 8 is going to fool a lot of people into buying the wrong 5060 Ti. Therefore, we're putting this in avoid at all costs. Don't get it. Avoid this GPU, please. Do not, you're throwing money away. RTX 5060 Ti 16GB. This GPU is actually not that bad. Now, I will say in terms of current pricing, it's hanging out at about $450 US. I don't know how that looks like in Europe. I haven't had time to check, but it's not that bad. Now, in terms of rasterization performance, like I said, the 9060 XT is right behind the 5060 Ti 16GB. But in terms of ray tracing performance, this does offer a fair bit more performance over the 9060 XT 16GB. And the other cool thing I want to mention about the 5060 Ti, because this was also a concern on the 9060 XT 16GB, is that the 5060 Ti 16GB also has a 128-bit memory bus right here, as you can see. But what makes it different versus the 9060 XT is that unlike the 9060 XT, this comes with GDDR7 memory, which is also on the regular 5060 Ti 8GB, but even that doesn't help it. But on this one it does, because it increases its memory bandwidth to 448 gigabits per second, which actually kind of allows you to push more information through that really small 128-bit memory bus, which is, I mean, not ideal. I wish it were 256 bits, but it's making the best of a suboptimal situation. If you don't know what the heck I just said, just take this at face value. GDDR7 was a good move on the 5060 Ti, and I'm glad Nvidia featured it. And for its price, it's not terrible in terms of relative gaming performance. Yeah, the 9060 XT has more price to performance, but the 5060 Ti 16GB for offering that much VRAM with GDDR7 at 450 is not the worst either. For 1440p gaming, it's gonna be nice. And I'm gonna throw this in C tier above the B580. Again, I don't think it's as great of a value and gaming GPU as the 9060 XT 16GB, but I think for its price and how much it offers, it's gonna be better than a B580 right now. Oh yeah, the RX 9070 GRE, why am I ranking this? Because it's only available in China. It just became available in Taiwan, but I'm pretty sure it's eventually gonna make its way over to Europe and the United States. So I might as well go ahead and rank it now. The RX 9070 GRE is a cut down RX 9070 with 12 gigabytes of VRAM, which isn't the worst thing in the world, but it is a bit of an upset considering that the 9070 and 9070 XT come with 16 gigabytes of VRAM. And in terms of relative performance, if this rings a bell, the 9070 GRE is bang on the same performance as a 7900 GRE, but the 7900 GRE comes with 16 gigabytes of VRAM. That said, it's not too bad. And again, we don't know pricing of the 9070 GRE when it finally drops in the US and wherever else, but I would expect it would be cheaper than the RTX 5070. It would probably have an MSRP of at most $500, and if and AMD want to be nice, maybe 450. That would actually, yeah, AMD would have to do that, which would make it actually a pretty decent value. But again, we all wish it would have come with more VRAM. But I guess really the whole point of the RX 9070 GRE is to low-key subvert the RTX 5070, because if you were to look at benchmarks between the 5070 and the 9070 GRE, they both have the same amount of VRAM, but the 9070 GRE is like 1% slower than the 5070. Yet in China and Taiwan, the 9070 GRE is cheaper. So when this hits the States, I think it's gonna be not too bad. I'd like to see it on discount for below 450, but it's probably gonna be at 450 if I'm being honest. So I'm gonna put this right in between the 5060 Ti 16GB and the B580. It's gonna be all right. I just wish it had more VRAM. But with what it has, I think it does a pretty good job. Unlike the RTX 5070, the 5070 is a bit of a tragedy actually. So the TLDR on the RTX 5070 is that it has the exact same performance as a last generation RTX 4070 Super. And the only silver lining is that the MSRP of the RTX 5070 was $550, whereas the RTX 4070 Super 1 year ago was $600. So you're getting basically the same performance with a $50 discount. But even then, it's still quite a bit of an upset for the 5070 to not offer any real generational improvement in performance, especially considering the fact that this has GDDR7 memory versus the 4070 Super's old GDDR6X memory. So if you remove the faster memory from this 5070 and put on the same old GDDR6X memory from the 4070 Super, you'll actually run into a scenario where the successor GPU is slower than the previous GPU, which makes the 5070 just quite a bit of an upset. Also in terms of pricing, it's not $550 right now. Although on GPUs.gg, we do have a Walmart link for $550. This isn't always in stock, as you can see right here, but you can get one on Newegg or Amazon right now for just above $600. Yep, as you can see right here. And that's a bit of a problem because there's a certain other graphics card for the same price that we're gonna cover real soon that makes this GPU look irrelevant, but we'll get into that later. What also sucks about the 5070 is that its ray tracing performance, which would be a selling point for this graphics card, is at the same price to performance as, I'm gonna spoil this, the RX 9070. Like I said, Radeon caught up in terms of ray tracing performance this generation. And we saw that with this GPU and this GPU. And yeah, the 5070, if you were wanting to buy it for ray tracing, that's no longer really a benefit anymore because, like I said, the 9070 offers the same performance per dollar among other benefits that make it a more worthwhile GPU than the 5070. So really you're left with DLSS 4 and how much you value that, which I'm putting this, oh, okay. D tier above the B570. I think that's fine. But now let's talk about the RX 9070, and this GPU, in my opinion, has made quite a bit of a comeback. So it had an original MSRP of $550, which, speaking of, was actually quite good. It outperformed the RX 7900 XT in terms of regular gaming performance, but more so in ray tracing, which was great to see. And like I just said, in terms of ray tracing performance, the RX 9070 has the same performance per dollar in ray tracing as the RTX 5070, because both have the same MSRP, yet the 9070 was matching it. And to top it all off, the RX 9070, unlike the RTX 5070, comes with 16 gigabytes of VRAM on a fat 256-bit memory bus, which is where we're all good. In terms of hardware, it's got everything. But after it launched, and as we saw with the other RX GPU in this tier list, prices spiraled out of control, and AMD couldn't really honor that original MSRP of $550 because RX 9070s at the time were selling for about $700, which is $150 over MSRP. But I'm happy to report, about 4 months on from its launch, the RX 9070 can be had for $600, both on Newegg and just for a little bit more on Amazon. That's actually not too bad. So you're matching the ray tracing performance of the RTX 5070, but you have much better rasterization performance, which is faster than an RX 7900 XT, which right now costs more than an RX 9070. You're also given access to FSR 4, which is something I haven't quite brought up in this tier list, but if you were to look at FSR 4 versus DLSS 4 comparisons, FSR 4 is actually quite good. So much so actually that if you were to compare both images side by side, you have to get a magnifying glass to see the difference between DLSS 4 and FSR 4. But I really think what makes this GPU stand out for its price is the hardware. 16 gigabytes of VRAM with a 256-bit memory bus with much improved ray tracing performance, that really efficient and excellent RDNA 4 architecture, which I will say the RX 9070 actually I think operates at a lower overall power consumption than the RTX 5070. So once again, another L for the 5070. And yeah, the 9070 is pretty fine for 600 bucks. And when it comes down to MSRP, hopefully come Black Friday, it'll be a really compelling GPU to buy for no questions asked 1440p gaming. Therefore, I gotta throw this thing in A tier. It's good. It's genuinely good. Oh boy. Well, we knew this one was coming. Let's talk about the RX 9070 XT. So same premise as the RX 9070, but the RX 9070 XT had an MSRP of $600. And if you're to look at gaming performance benchmarks between this and the 9070, no one in their right mind would want to save $50 and get that RX 9070. The RX 9070 XT for only $50 more than the 9070 we just ranked was a no-brainer when this graphics card launched. At 600 bucks, this probably might go down as the next GTX 1080 Ti of graphics cards. A graphics card that punches so much higher above its price category. In fact, there are memes online of this GPU beating the RTX 5080, and people are like, how what? And that is because the hardware that comes with this 9070 XT for its MSRP of $600 is the top of its class. You're given everything from the RDNA 4 die that is on this GPU. It is just spectacular in terms of its performance. That's all I gotta say. Even in ray tracing as well. Actually, as a comparison, this was AMD's old flagship GPU, the RX 7900 XTX, and you'll be surprised to know that the 9070 XT has about, or even slightly less in terms of rasterization performance. But for ray tracing, this thing slaughters the old 7900 XTX. Once again, AMD made some really big strides for ray tracing on RX 9000. So all this sounds super sweet and super awesome. But again, AMD had a pricing problem after the launch of this graphics card, because no way was this graphics card gonna stay at $600 at launch. It shot up immediately up to $800 or even $900. And I got quite a few people in the comment sections of my previous videos telling me they bought one for like 960 bucks, which is mental. Don't do that. No. This graphics card should be sold at about $600, like its original MSRP, and it would be, I'm just gonna say it, if you can get the 9070 XT at its MSRP of $600, we'll play the music. S tier, easily, done deal, 600 bucks. It's gonna go down as the GTX 1080 Ti of AMD graphics cards. It is a GPU, like I said, that punches so far above its weight class. But there's a problem. If we check pricing for the 9070 XT, it's at $700. That's not as sexy as $600. And that's on Newegg, not so much on Amazon or Walmart or other retailers. And I think if we were to go abroad, let's just pick a random country. Let's do Spain. What does España have to say for the 9070 XT? Oh, oops. What about the Brits? Surely you got something to say about the 9070 XT. 760 pounds. Again, I think that's quite a bit off the MSRP. The pricing of this graphics card at this moment isn't as good as it should be, because then it puts it in the firing line of the RTX 5070 Ti, which has its own set of benefits to getting over the 9070 XT. So while this GPU deserves S tier, for its current pricing, I gotta put it in A tier above the RX 9070. If and when this graphics card finally comes down in price to its $600 MSRP, it is going to force the RTX 5070 Ti, RTX 5080 to both come down in price because, again, it is that good for $600. But it's not selling at that price. We don't even know if it's going to come down in price. So A tier for now. And let me say, AMD, they better reduce the price of that 9070 XT soon, because the 5070 Ti might just be the best all-around RTX 5000 GPU you can currently buy. How I like to phrase this graphics card is that it is about 10% slower than the RTX 5080, while it costs about 40% less. Because that is how insane the pricing has gone for the 5080, which hasn't quite yet happened for the 5070 Ti. If we were to check out GPUs.gg, $840, that's okay. That's about $90 above MSRP, which is okay for the 5070 Ti, but it's a 5080 Lite. Like, it is not that far off of an RTX 5080, yet look at how much the 5080 is going for. $1,400, $1,350 if you're lucky. That's way too much. And again, the 5080 has the same amount of VRAM as the 5070 Ti. This also comes with 16 gigabytes of memory with a 256-bit memory bus. And don't forget, this also has that GDDR7 memory, which for regular PC games, you aren't going to notice that much of a difference, because again, we can see situations where the RX 9070 XT is able to outclass the 5070 Ti, despite having older GDDR6 memory. But if you do VR, this might be my favorite graphics card for VR, because that GDDR7 memory allows you to push more memory bandwidth into the 5070 Ti, which benefits VR, which can run at very high resolution. So another bonus for the 5070 Ti. Now, I will say this is about 5% faster than the 9070 XT, yet right now, it's going for about 15% more in price. So $840 here versus $700 on the 9070 XT. So you really have to weigh in, like, how much do you value DLSS 4? Is that something you are wanting to use? Are you gonna make sure that the games you're gonna play on this graphics card are going to perform better on this GPU than the 9070 XT? But I still think this is not a bad purchase whatsoever. There's not that many things wrong with this GPU at this moment. Sure, it's a bit slightly overpriced, but that's just about the only downside. And when this GPU comes down in price, I think it's going to be the RTX 5000 GPU to get, because you realistically don't need anything more than this. Like the 5080, vaporware. Like, if you're playing at 1440p, you don't need a 5080. A 5070 Ti is going to be very sufficient. Therefore, I'm going to throw this in B tier, just below the 9060 XT 16GB. It's not that bad. It's probably going to be my favorite Nvidia GPU this generation. However, I did say I would only feature brand new graphics cards, and I meant it. However, AMD is still producing the RX 7900 XTX, and I checked GPUs.gg just to check this out. But yep, you can still get the 7900 XTX for below MSRP in 2025, and same goes abroad. Even here in the UK, for example, you can get one for about £940, which look at how much cheaper that is versus the 5080 at £1,250. But the 7900 XTX is a double-bladed sword. It's a bit tricky to recommend in 2025 because of how much improvement AMD has made with their RX 9000 GPUs when it comes to ray tracing, which isn't going to be found on this older RX 7000 GPU. The ray tracing performance on this, although it's still going to be, as I've said in the past, so fast that you aren't going to really need to worry about it. Just the fact that these RX 9000 GPUs do so much better of a job while using less power, while being more efficient and cheaper in price, just makes these more attractive overall versus this. But I guess if you didn't care whatsoever about ray tracing and you really wanted that 24 gigabytes of VRAM that come in this graphics card for ultimate rasterization performance out of an AMD graphics card, sure, you're welcome to go for it. But I think this is only like 3% faster than the 9070 XT, and the 9070 XT, yeah, 760 pounds versus this at 940 pounds. Not worth it, although it's got a lot of VRAM. So this is gonna go in D tier below the B570. It's not the most attractive graphics card purchase for its price. I think the 9070 XT is just too good of an all-around GPU while retailing for less. But I mean, the 7900 XTX is still technically being made, so I gotta include it. Okay, 5080. I have some opinions on this graphics card. Basically, it's too damn expensive. Okay, here in the United Kingdom, the 5080 is actually still overpriced by, I think, 250 pounds, but what's happening in the United States, dude? The 5080 is going for like $1,400. That's $400 over MSRP. And it just doesn't make any sense to get versus the 5070 Ti. The 5070 Ti is only 10% less overall in terms of performance versus the 5080, yet it comes in at a 40% reduction in price versus this. That's ridiculous. You are really overpaying for a 5080 in 2025. And I guess if we want to talk about launch day reviews for the 5080, it didn't really show a generational uplift in performance versus the old 4080. In fact, it was pretty depressing. This didn't really offer that much more. If you wanted to extract the full performance of the 5080 when you got one, you basically had to overclock it, which I mean, you're welcome to do, but the 5080 also on the other hand has some good efficiency. But just the main point is that you should not be paying that much for a graphics card with the same VRAM as a 5070 Ti, despite this only being 10% faster. It does not make any sense in my head. I know, and I mean, the real problem is that AMD doesn't have a competing graphics card for the price of a 5080. That's why the 5080 is selling for this much, and the price isn't changing at all. If we had an RX 9800 XT or 9080 XT, that would bring down the price of the 5080 for sure. But there isn't one, therefore it's gonna still stay overinflated in price and just simply not be worth it. Seriously, if you're a gamer and you're playing at 1440p, you don't need any more than a 5070 Ti or a 9070 XT. The 5080, I mean, maybe 4K gaming enthusiasts who want to run path tracing on the games that support it, but for the casuals and the masses, you don't need not only a 5080, you don't need to pay this much for one. It's not offering that much more over the old 4080. You might as well get an older 4080 Super for way less on the used marketplace. It just doesn't make sense to buy a 5080 right now. I hope it comes down in price because this is one of the few high-end graphics cards that are available right now that isn't a 5070 Ti or a 9070 XT that offers more performance, but you shouldn't be paying this much more for only 10% uplift versus the 5070 Ti. So actually, I messed up. We need to add a row below, and we need to change this to E, and we need to change some colors around. And the 5080 is going where I think it belongs, E tier. Just disgusting. Disgusting price tag for it. We've hit the end of the road. I've got one, I use it, and I'm gonna tell you what I think about it, on top of all the other aggregated reviews for the RTX 5090. This GPU has an MSRP of $2,000. I will say though, when this GPU launched at its MSRP of again $2,000, it actually stacked up not the worst against the 4090, despite the disappointment of the 5080 and the 5070. The 5090 was at least generationally faster than the 4090, while it cost $2,000 versus the 4090 at $1,600. Still not the greatest, but I mean, where else are you gonna find a consumer graphics card with 32 gigabytes of VRAM? But man, it has been 6 months. You cannot find a 5090 for $2,000. You are smoking bullets if you think you can. The cheapest 5090 I was able to derive on GPUs.gg is this $2,759 model from Asus, which is a good model, but that is $760 above MSRP. And I got bad news, part 2. The 4090 after it launched never went down to MSRP. It never went down. I think the cheapest I saw one was $1,770, like a year after it released. So, spoiler alert, you are never gonna find this GPU ever again for MSRP. We can just tell that off of historical pricing trends. meaning it's gonna stay inflated in price for however long. And again, like I just mentioned for the 5080, AMD does not have a 9900 XT or a 9080 XT that is lowering the price of the 5090 or the 5080. So it's gonna stay really marked up in price. Thanks, AMD. And where do I think it belongs on the tier list? So again, I won't dispute the fact that this is the best available consumer graphics card on the market. It is, by definition, the best. It is 100% at everything it does, in gaming and virtually everything else. But are you seriously gonna spend like $3,000 freaking dollars on a 5090 for gaming? You really wanna justify that? Do you really wanna justify that? Because I'm just gonna throw this at you. I'd rather spend $700 on a 9070 XT and get really high frame rate 1440p gaming performance with great ray tracing and FSR4. And on the Nvidia end too, a 5070 Ti is gonna be slightly faster than that 9070 XT, but give you the Nvidia features and Nvidia suite that you want out of an Nvidia GPU while offering great 1440p gaming performance, which the majority of you watching this video are probably gonna stay at 1440p. This GPU is for people who have that ridiculous 4K 360 Hz or 240 Hz monitor that want to max out the refresh rate of that monitor, or you could be someone who dropped thousands of dollars on that super expensive Pimax VR headset with that ridiculous resolution that it supports, and you actually need a graphics card with 32 gigabytes of VRAM with GDDR7 memory modules for an insanely high memory bandwidth. Or you could be someone who's doing AI applications and you need a lot of VRAM. You could be someone who does extreme rendering for 3D modeling or simulations. What I'm trying to say is that the 5090 isn't for gamers. It's gone beyond gamers. It's for people who can't afford to buy like that Nvidia A series Quadro card, or I think the RTX something Pro card, who can't afford to spend ridiculous amounts of money for those and need something that is cheaper and more mainstream. This isn't for gamers anymore. The 5090 is just way too expensive. There's not a lot of rationale for justifying it at its price for gaming, but it's still technically the best graphics card there is. So I'm gonna put this at the bottom of D tier. My reasons and all that I said, yep, it's all out there. I rest my case. And finally, with the 5090 ranked, let's go ahead and whoa, you skipped to the end of the video. I knew you did, and you know what, that's okay. Just two things to keep in mind. If you're wondering why a certain graphics card placed where it did in my tier list and you don't know why I did that, please go to one of the timestamps in the description down below and watch why I ranked a certain graphics card where it belonged in the tier list. I see a lot of people who skip to the end of this video and then they ask those questions in the comments, and I already answered them in this video. So check out the timestamps. And then second, because you skipped to the end of the video, that's low-key gonna mess up my watch time. So all I ask in return is that you give it a like. That's it. Yeah, just give it a like. All right, so with that, let's go ahead and cover the final tier list for the, whoa, did you like the video yet? I'm gonna give you 5 seconds. Okay, here you go. So here is the best and worst graphics cards you can buy in 2025 brand new. Again, brand new. These are all graphics cards that have released in the year 2025. So overall, not been the greatest, especially from Team Green. A lot of their higher end GPUs, because AMD isn't providing any aggressive competition in the form of a RX 9080 XT or a 9090 XT, means the 5080 and 5090 are off the charts in terms of pricing, and we may not see them come down in price. But the good news is that at least there is competition in the upper mid-range. So the 9070 XT, 9070, 5070 Ti are pretty compelling buys for high-end 1440p gaming. Also, shout out to the RX 9060 XT 16GB. I think that's probably the best budget graphics card out of this entire video. For $350 US, it's a really good 1440p gaming GPU with 16GB of VRAM and great ray tracing performance to pair with it. Also, the 5060 Ti 16GB isn't that bad either, but the 9060 XT 16GB is a better value, just plain and simple. It's also almost as fast as the 5060 Ti 16GB. Then the Intel Arc cards need to come down in price. They need to. Come down to the MSRPs they originally had, and then they'll be better. Same could be said for the 9070 XT. If the 9070 XT actually honored its $600 MSRP, it'd be S tier. Easily. But right now, it's not, so I gotta put it down in A tier. And just about all the low-end Nvidia GPUs that have 8 gigabytes of VRAM, you need to stay away from. They're all e-waste. Slow. Well, not slow, but they're very limited GPUs. And there you go. That's it for the tier list. And if you enjoyed it, feel free to subscribe to the Scattervolt YouTube channel. I mean, we release tier list videos when they come and go, so I hope you enjoyed this one. And again, please feel free to give it a like if you enjoyed what you saw. So with all that said, thank you so much for watching, and this is the Scattervolt channel, signing out.